Hello and welcome back to another Gates of Antares painting tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how you can paint the warrior miners, the Boromites, and I'll be using the Army Painter's range of paints to do so. Here we have the Boromite, and you can see it's been primed using the Army Painter's uniform grey spray primer. This gives us an excellent base for the kind of the grey skin tone that we've got there. Now the first step for painting this miniature is to paint the more fleshy areas, such as on the chest there, the facial features, the bicep, things like that. Painting all of these areas with skeleton bone. For this step I'm using my regiment brush, and I'm just going to be very carefully painting these areas. Now it's generally a good idea to paint from the inside out of a model, so we're starting with the inner areas and we're painting outwards. It makes it a lot easier to reach those hard to get areas, such as the skin under the face here, like so. Once the base layer is down, we can now start on a wash, and for this we'll be using soft toning. Once again, using my regiment brush, I've mixed in a small amount of water, about 30% of the actual the total, and I'm just going to be applying this over the skin areas. You can see here we're just getting some nice definition in the recesses there. When the wash is dry, we can now start highlighting the flesh areas, and for this we'll be using a 50-50 mix of skeleton bone and also matte white as well. Now if you do have access to the Zombicide range of paints, you could alternatively use Bray Matter Beige. This time I'm using my character brush. I want a slightly more control over the brush. So I just wanted to be highlighting the edges, just focusing on the raised sections, just like so, and just adding in some lines there, just to act as kind of muscle definition. Just painting the biceps there, and also highlighting the facial features like so. With the skin areas completed, we can now move on to painting some of the other areas. First of all, we'll be painting the main stock of the gun, and also various areas across the miniature. This includes the ammo pouch at the back. Now I would recommend taking a look at some of the studio photography for the Boromites, just to be sure as to which areas need to be painted black. And for this I'll be using matte black. For these areas I'll be using a mixture of my character and regiment brush depending on the size. So for this area I'll just be applying the black paint like so. And I've mixed in just a very small drop of water just to improve the flow slightly, and if you need to you can apply 2 coats once the first coat is dry, and this will give you a really nice and even coverage of black. Now that all of the black areas have been painted, we can start moving on to doing some highlights, and for this we'll be using uniform grey. For the highlights I'm using my character brush here. I'm just going to be dragging the brush gently along the edges like so, just to create some nice highlights on the black areas. I'll be doing this anywhere that I've painted black on the previous step. The next steps to paint are all of the yellow armor plating. Now these are scattered across the miniature, so we've got the areas on the weapon there, the armor plating on the body, along the top there, on the back, various areas. It's a good idea to take a look at some of the artwork and the photography for the studio miniatures, just to find exactly which areas need to be painted. And for this we'll be using desert yellow. As with the black areas, I'm going to be switching between a regiment brush and a character brush to paint these areas, just depending on how small the area is, just give me a bit more control. I'm just going to be painting a couple of layers on as well. I've mixed in a small amount of water, maybe about a third of the mixture, and this will just give me some better flow and allow me to create some nice even coverage. Once the base layer is down, we can now start washing the yellow areas, and for this we'll be using soft toning. I'll be applying this wash using my regiment brush here, as it gives us quite a good amount of coverage, quick coverage over the areas like this. I'm being careful not to overspill onto the areas we've already painted. With the wash complete, we can now start on highlighting the yellow areas, and for this we'll be using a 50-50 mix of demonic yellow and desert yellow. Once again I'm using my character brush for this step, and I'll just be dragging this paint, the mixture of the demonic yellow and also the desert yellow, across the edges of the yellow areas like so, creating a nice highlight, and being very careful not to overspill onto the black areas that we've painted. The next step is to paint any of the lenses on the weapon, including this one just here, and also any wires, just so we've got the one running at the back, and also any canteens and pouches that you may have on the back of the miniature. We're painting all of these areas with angel green. Now, seeing as most of these areas are quite small, I'm going to be using my character brush again, just to make sure that I've got as much control as I need over the brush. I'm just going to be very carefully painting the green areas. I will now be highlighting all of the areas we painted green in the previous step with Goblin Green, and I'll be making sure that this lens at the bottom here, I only highlight the bottom edge. With my character brush, I'll just be picking out the edges of the green areas, just like on the pouch at the bottom here. And as I already mentioned, just picking out the bottom edge of the lens just on the weapon there as well. The final step for painting the green areas is to wash over them with green tone ink. As I want to be very careful not to overspill onto the yellow areas, at this stage I'm going to be using my character brush again for this wash. I'm just going to be applying it directly over the green areas, both the original base coat and also the highlight as well. And this will in effect create some nicer blending and also blend in the highlight as well. For any green lenses that you've got across the miniature, which for example this one on the weapon here, we're painting a small dot of matte white into the top corner of the lens, the opposite to which we did the highlight in the previous step. In order to get as small a dot as possible, I'm going to be using my detail brush here. I'm just going to be gently dabbing into the top right corner there, just to create a nice reflection in the lens. With the green areas complete, we can now move on to the Scaly hide, and the first step is to wash over the entirety of it with blue tone ink. Using my regiment brush for this step, as I want to get some quick nice coverage over the areas, but I still want to maintain some control so not as to overspill into the arrow areas, I'm just using this. I'm going to be applying it very liberally across the Boromites Scaly hide like so, making sure that it gets into all of the recesses. So as you can see, the blue has given us some nice definition in the recesses of the Scaly hide there. And the next step is to highlight all of the scales with ash grey. For this step I'm using my regiment brush, and this is because we don't need to be too precise when painting the scales. We just need to make sure we don't dip into the recesses. As long as the actual flat parts of the scales, the raised parts, are ash grey, it doesn't matter too much how neat we are. Now the final area that we're painting on this miniature are the metal areas. So this includes some of the equipment on the backpack. So we've got the buckle on the canteen, the cap on the canteen, and some of the equipment dotted about the miniature as well. We're painting all of these areas with gunmetal. For this stage I'm using my character brush, and this gives me a good amount of control over the areas. It stops me from overspilling onto the other areas, but it's still large enough to paint some of these sections quite quickly. With the first base coat down, I'll now be washing over the metal areas with dark tone ink. Once again, I'm using my character brush for this step. I'm just going to be applying the wash over the metal areas there, making sure that it gets into all of the recesses, create some nice shading, as you can see here. And here we have the completed miniature. Now whilst I've used one of the Boromite gang fighters as the subject of this tutorial, you could apply the same techniques to any of the Boromite miniatures. Additionally, I've gone for a more of a bluish tone on the scales. However, if you wanted to remain a grey, you could use a dark tone ink wash instead of the blue tone ink wash that I used in this particular tutorial. If you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to see more, be sure to check out my previous Gates of Antares painting tutorials, as well as subscribing to be kept up to date with all the latest videos that I do. If you would like to support me in making more tutorials, you can do so by heading over to my Patreon page, which you can find a link for in the description below. So until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.